And then the last thing I want to talk about is the NFL this year. Man, it stinks. And maybe it's coming from a biased Patriots fans point of view, right? Obviously the Patriots games, watching that, it's like watching paint dry. It's horrible. It's torture. I'd rather be waterboarded. It's not a good time. I sit there and I cringe because, Bill Belichick gets all this crap, and he deserves a lot of it, certainly, but he's a defensive genius, and he's showing it this year. The defense is one of the top defenses, if not the very top defense, yards and points per game wise in the NFL right now, and it's being wasted. I think it was the second team ever to have their defense give up 10 or less points in 3 straight games and lose all 3. It's borderline upsetting to watch them at this point. And I mean, I don't know, you know what? It is upsetting. It's not borderline upsetting. It is upsetting. But even moving on from that, there's just a lot of bad football right now. There's a lot of really bad teams. And I think even worse, there's a lot of teams that are underperforming what we all hoped this year. There's plenty of teams. Obviously, I can look at the Bengals that I thought were going to run away with the division, even with the Ravens, and they have just been hot or cold and no in between. They either have played really well or really bad. Now Joe Burrow is seemingly out for the season with a wrist or hand injury of some kind. So at this point, I have no hope for the Bengals. The Steelers, I know I'm talking about underperforming teams, and they're the opposite. So maybe we move on from that for now, and I'll save that for a little bit. But, I just realized I never talked about the Yankees. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. That's maybe for another video. But regardless, let's get back to football. So other teams that are, the entire NFC South is just a disaster. Obviously, the Panthers speak for themselves. They've struggled all year. The Saints haven't been very good. The Falcons are leading the division, with I think they're 6-7 or 6-6, which is not a terrible record by any means, but certainly not, I think, phenomenal enough to warrant a division win if you're 6-6 and you're projected to be obviously 8-9 or 9-8 for the rest of the season. Not for the rest of the season, but at the end of the season. And then obviously the Bucks, I think they started off the year great, and then they've kind of fallen back down to their true talent, which is, I would say, middle of the pack in the NFL at this point, which is nothing to be ashamed of. They have great talent at some positions and not nearly enough talent at other positions. It makes sense that they're middle of the pack. I hope Baker Mayfield gets another chance. I think he's played well enough this year to deserve one. Obviously, he's had his good games and his bad games, just like a lot of other quarterbacks have. But that doesn't surprise me. He's not a phenomenal quarterback, but I think he's earned another shot either in Tampa next year or elsewhere to, at the very least, be a bridge quarterback for a young guy. Maybe if you're one of the top teams, you bring in Baker Mayfield to be either your backup or to be your starter for one of the guys you draft. I'm not really coming up with a team that would make sense because obviously the Carolina Panthers, one, don't have their pick, and two, even if they did have their pick, they're still going to start Bryce Young even if they bring Baker in. Chicago's probably going to have the number 2 or they're going to have another top 5 pick, and they have Carolina's pick anyway. Even if they don't take a quarterback, that just means that they're sticking with Justin Fields. And if they do draft a quarterback, you have Justin Fields and Caleb Williams presumably on your team at that point. You're not going to bring in Baker. Or if you do, he's probably not going to want to sign there because he knows the writing on the wall. He's never going to play. I mean, if you drafted Caleb Williams and kept Justin Fields, or even if you traded Justin Fields and then you started Baker Mayfield, that fan base, I think, would burn Soldier Field to the ground. I don't think that fan base would tolerate any more tomfoolery at this point. So I'm not really coming up with, obviously Arizona has Kyler Murray, and even if you trade him away, that'd be the only way I could see that. If you trade Kyler away and then you draft Drake May, maybe you bring in Baker for a year and have Drake May sit behind him. But at that point, I don't think that's really going to make sense, and certainly not for the Patriots. Please don't. Sorry, guys, my mic just cut out, so I'm gonna have to edit that out. But please, don't do that. If please don't. If you draft a quarterback, don't you dare bring in Baker Mayfield to start over him when you have no weapons for him to throw to. So anyway, the main reason why this NFL year has been so bad, other than the underperforming teams, is because I think now it's up to 13 of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL are injured, and some, if not most, are pretty much out for the year. So, you've got a lot of backup quarterback play, which, no offense to backup NFL quarterbacks, but 90% of the time, they're not going to be a guy that's going to carry your franchise. Not a lot of Tom Brady sitting on the bench at a lot of these teams. So, it's been tough to watch a lot of Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays. It's just been difficult to watch, quite frankly, and you have a lot more really close games this year than I think we've had in a while, which is good because obviously you're invested in these games, but I feel like there's also more absolute demolitions happening as well. I think that, at least from what I've seen, I feel like most NFL games right now are either 1-score games or 49-12. Like, and to me, it feels like oftentimes there's no in between. And so it's one of those things where, hey, you're getting basically a 50-50 shot of a great game here, which is fine. I mean, that part's not the issue, but I feel like there's just such a weird talent gap between the great teams in the NFL and everybody else right now, which is not obviously what the NFL is meant to be. I think that there's a lot of teams that are just mediocre or slightly below average, that their records are dependent on who they play throughout the year. Again, no offense to the Atlanta Falcons, but that's a team that really comes to mind where, they're beating up on their division, but they really haven't beaten much of anybody else this year. They haven't done a whole lot outside of beating up on the teams in their division, and then obviously a couple other wins, and they're 6-6. But I think that if you put them in the NFC East and they were playing the Cowboys twice, the Eagles twice, and the Commanders twice, I think that they are a worse team than obviously the Eagles and the Cowboys. So I'd say you're probably going 0-4 right there, and so your record now is going from 6-6 to 4-8, and now you're a bad team. You've got a top 10 draft pick. So there's just such a talent gap right now. And again, partially it's because of the quarterback stuff, where a lot of quarterbacks are getting hurt. So that certainly plays a role for teams. And there are teams that are now, taking advantage of it. I talked about the Steelers a little bit earlier. I mentioned them. They were the first team in NFL history to be outscored in their first 9 weeks of football and still have a winning record. And not only did they have a winning record, they were 6-3. Like, unbelievable. Like, you're talking about you're winning these such close games, despite the fact that you're being outplayed every week. Now they're finally starting to lose a few games. I think they're 6-5 now, or 6-6. Or 7-5, whatever it is. They're losing some games now that makes sense, and I think the Patriots are actually playing them this week, so they're going to get back in their winning ways, hopefully. But they're overperforming. I think to a lot of people, the Houston Texans are overperforming. They have a real shot to win that division, guys. I know that they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars last week or 2 weeks ago, so that probably didn't help. I can't remember if they've played them twice now, but that certainly didn't help to lose that game. But now that Trevor Lawrence is out, I think he's going to be out for probably multiple weeks, if not the entire year. I cannot remember. But, they've got a chance now, if they could stay healthy, to win that division, because The Jaguars are decent, but, you know, who knows what's going to come out of there in terms of their backup quarterbacks. So, you know, we'll see what happens. But I think the Texans, to a lot of people, are overperforming. And I think that when the Cardinals made that trade, you know, with the Texans to move out of the number 3 spot back to number 6 or whatever it was, or 9 or 8, I can't remember. It wasn't 8 because that was the Falcons pick. But, you know, whatever it was, you know, I think a lot of people were like, oh, so the Cardinals are going to have 2 top 5 picks next year because everybody expected the Texans to still be bad, including myself. But obviously that's not the case. They are playing very well, and it's on the back of CJ Stroud, which makes me very happy as an Ohio State fan to see a quarterback perform that well coming out of that school. And obviously for Houston, because I think that with the whole Deshaun Watson thing, I mean, you know, I think one thing that gets lost is Houston is a very, very young franchise compared to a lot of the franchises in the NFL. They were one of the newer expansion franchises. I think their first draft pick was in 2002, and it was David Carr, a quarterback. They picked a quarterback number 1 overall as an expansion franchise. And so you're thinking, oh, yeah, we got our guy for the next 10 years, and it just didn't pan out. Now, a lot of it was because of the lack of talent around the guy, and he was getting, you know, his head ripped off every single play. But, you know, it didn't work out for a variety of reasons, and the Texans have not had a good quarterback really in their entire history before Deshaun Watson, and then they finally got one, and obviously it ended in catastrophe. You know, with the sexual assault and rape allegations and all that stuff, and you know, people can call Deshaun Watson a perv all they want. I've said on this channel, if there's evidence, I'll be the first one to tell you that he's a perv. And you know, I assume that there was probably some stuff that I wouldn't love that happened during those. But the fact is that he's been, you know, charges have been dropped, and that's that. But either way, it's still for the Texans ended in catastrophe. And so I'm happy that at least for now they have a guy that they can rely on for maybe the first time ever. I mean, obviously they could rely on Deshaun, but, you know, that only lasted a year or two. So I'm hoping that CJ Stroud can be reliable for longer than that. But right now there's a glimmer of hope in Houston that I haven't seen in a long time. And so I'm very happy for that franchise. I'm very happy for them. I think the Colts are overperforming as well. Not to the degree as the Texans or the Steelers, but I think that they are right around 500. And with the fact that AR-15 is not playing all year because of a shoulder injury, which, again, that's just it's brutal to see when you got a guy who's that much of a physical freak, already starting to have surgeries and stuff at that young age. Reminds me a lot of Cam Newton, so I'm worried for the guy. Hopefully he'll get back and healthy and remain that way for a long time. I don't want to see anybody, you know, start to get all their muscles torn out and have a shortened career. But they are a team that makes not a whole lot of sense to me. Their offensive line has not performed extremely well this year. Jonathan Taylor has not really been the old Jonathan Taylor for most of the season. Their defense is pretty good, but obviously not superb. I wouldn't say a top 5 defense. Maybe top 10 in certain categories. But, you know, I certainly wouldn't be shocked if I looked up the statistics and they were the 13th or 14th ranked defense somewhere in the middle of the pack. I wouldn't be shocked. So to me, when you are just, you know, you got your backup quarterback in, albeit Gardner Minshew does have some experience starting and he's performed decently well throughout his career in pretty much all roles. He's had his good days, he's had his bad days, just like everybody else. But he's definitely, I think, one of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL for sure. So, you know, a guy that's gonna at least not cost you games for the most part. Back there for the Colts. But, I mean, outside of that, I mean, you got a couple of weapons in terms of, you know, offense, and you got a couple good players on defense, and then you obviously have Quentin Nelson and a couple other offensive linemen that are good, but I don't know. I think that they're just overperforming a little bit, and certainly they're in the mix for that division, and we'll kind of see where it goes. The Broncos, another one. They've really turned it around, haven't they? I mean, they were just a absolute poverty franchise for the last 1.5 years, and then suddenly the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it's been, they have just been on a tear. And they are, I mean, they beat the Chiefs, It's just they are really just killing it right now. And I'm happy for Russell Wilson that he's, finally kind of getting that washed monkey off of his back. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are still going to think he's washed, and that is what it is, but he's certainly playing better than he was. He certainly looks like he's got a little bit more juice that he's playing with. He looks a little bit like the old Russ. Not quite like the old Russ, obviously, but he's looking a little bit better than what he was. So happy for him and happy for the Broncos. And then I gotta talk about the Chargers. Boy, howdy. I really thought that this was the year that they were going to step up. And from what I understand, a lot of it's coaching, right? A coach that doesn't understand how to best coach in certain situations, how to, in terms of play calling, what to run when, in certain aspects, in certain points in the game. But for me, I always kind of look at it as, all right, well, the coach doesn't go out there and run the plays for you. And so it's one of those things where, there's probably talent gaps in places as well, that we're not really talking a whole lot about. Obviously, they got a good quarterback. They've got a good running back. They've got a decent offensive line. They've got a bunch of different weapons. A lot of them are hurt right now, but they do have some weapons, and they have had weapons for a lot of the season. And, they have some good pieces on defense too, and young guys to build around. Obviously, Derwin James is one of my favorite players in the NFL. But it just they haven't been able to put it together. And, maybe it is coaching. Maybe it is, I wouldn't ever say solely on coaching, but maybe it is the majority on the coaching. Maybe they are just really screwing the pooch when it comes to putting guys in position to succeed. But I don't know about that, quite frankly. I think that there's obviously coaching, but I think that there's a talent gap also, some holes that need to be filled on that roster. And, I think Brandon Staley is certainly gone after the season. I don't see any reason to keep him around. And who knows? There's obviously a lot of talks about them getting Bill Belichick as their coach, so we'll see if it happens. I don't know. But, yeah. So, again, my thoughts are really just, it's been a weird year football-wise, and it hasn't been good. So many quarterback injuries and teams that are overperforming, but a lot that are really underperforming. And certainly we expected a lot out of a few teams that have not given us what we wanted.